Do you know what day it is?
No.
It was just a year ago today that...
That's right. Today's our anniversary. I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's get the girls and go out tonight and celebrate our anniversary.
That's a good idea.
Get my wife on the phone.
What's the new number?
Can't you remember?
Well, they keep changing it.
It's Waterloo 22.
22?
22.
22.
22.
Hello, and welcome to this very special episode of the Laurel and Hardy blogcast. I'm Patrick Vasey, the author of the Laurel and Hardy blog, and this is our first year anniversary episode. Yes, the blogcast is celebrating its first birthday, and I wanted to share this special occasion with all of our listeners. So a few weeks ago, I invited members of the Blogheads Facebook community and also listeners from the wider community to drop me a line and share in the celebrations. And you responded. Some of you have written in and some of you have sent audio clips, but thank you, however you did it, thank you for your responses. Coming up shortly, we'll be taking a look at today's film in focus. Now, you may recall last time Glenn Mitchell and I looked at the last film that the boys made outside of the Stan and Ollie characters, which was, of course, Pudding Pants on Philip. So today, under the spotlight, is the next film they made together, and that is the 1927 silent short, The Battle of the Century. And joining me to discuss this classic is none other than returning guest, author, expert, Randy Skretvedt. But first, before we dive into all of that, let's hear from some of you.
Hey Patrick, this is Bob Gassell from the Marx Brothers Council Podcast. Just wishing you a happy anniversary. And, it's funny, I discovered your podcast because I was browsing around and I saw a podcast about duck soup coming up, and I turned it on and, lo and behold, it was you yapping about Laurel and Hardy. It wasn't the Marx Brothers at all. No, but seriously, happy anniversary, and I'm really looking forward to joining you down the line to talk about a couple of my favorite Laurel and Hardy films. Take care.
This is a gala day for you.
Well, a gala day is enough for me. I don't think I can handle anymore.
Bob, thank you so much for the message. It was really kind of you to get in touch. And I should just say that actually the wonderful Marx Brothers Council Podcast was a huge inspiration to me in creating the Laurel and Hardy blogcast. And I actually got in touch with Bob Gassell for advice, and he's always been very encouraging and helpful. So huge thanks to you, Bob. And just for you, on the blogcast's very own gala day, I couldn't resist sneaking in that little clip of another one of my heroes, the fabulous Groucho Marx.
Hello, this is Carrick from Canada. I'm a big fan of the Laurel and Hardy blogcast. It's probably my favorite podcast. I usually listen to it on the weekend when I'm doing my chores. I like listening to the episodes and hearing the discussion so I can get a feel of how these boys' careers progressed in chronological order, and I hope to see the series right up to the Atoll K. Thank you very much and keep up the good work.
Hi Patrick, Graham Well from Essex, UK here. Congrats on a year of podcasts, and thank you for giving us a professionally produced podcast that has helped us smile through this trying year that we've all had. It's as difficult to pick a favourite episode as trying to pick a favourite Laurel and Hardy short or answer your asshole question. Of course, episode 8, Sugar Daddies with Steve Masser and a cameo from yours truly is a highlight of mine. But all of your guests have been thoroughly entertaining. Craig Kalman talking about Hal Roach I found interesting, as Hal is someone I have to do a lot more research on, and I will be definitely buying his book. Anyway, thanks for the podcast and starting the Bloghead community on Facebook. Looking forward to more. Keep up the good work. Thanks again.
Thank you, Carrick, for your kind words. Yes, and I too hope to see this thing through to Atoll K, although we've got a lot to get through yet, so stay tuned for that. And Graham, great to hear from you again. Graham actually also wrote a nice word or two about the Blogheads Facebook group. He said one thing he didn't mention was how much he likes the Blogheads group. He thinks it's one of the best groups out of many on Facebook, with a nice bunch of people. It almost feels like a Sons of the Desert tent, which is nice, as we all haven't been able to meet up at any meetings lately. Maybe when we can all meet up, we should have a Blogheads meeting. Although with fans from all around the world, it could be difficult. Yeah, it could be difficult, but who knows? Stranger things have happened. Watch this space.
It could happen.
Why don't you keep your mouth shut?
Patrick, it's Chris Sagan, and I want to congratulate you on the first anniversary, first of what I assume is going to be many anniversary of what is one of the finest podcasts I think there is, not just about Laurel and Hardy, but just in classic comedy and film and fun to listen to in general. I appreciate you having me on early in the game to talk about Love and Hisses, with Love and Hisses. And it was a treat. It's great to talk to you always. You really have pushed it a lot in terms of really spreading the word of Laurel and Hardy, of Stan and Ollie, of Stan and Babe, and creating interesting conversations, thoughtful, intelligent talk with some great experts in their field. So an honor for me to be part of that, and I'll be listening to every single one from now on, and I'll be seeing you a lot on Blogheads as well. So congratulations. I don't have much more to say than that other than please keep up the good work. Please keep spreading the good word. And please keep Laurel and Hardy in the spotlight where they belong. Cheers, mate, and continued success again for years and years to come. Thanks, Patrick, and hopefully you'll have me on again soon. You know what I want to talk about. You know what I want to talk about.
Yes, Chris, I do indeed know what you want to talk about, but as I've just said, it's going to take us a good while to get to Atoll K. But again, thank you so much for the lovely message, Chris. I will pay you later once I've got Inflato working again. And as well as these lovely messages, we've also received a couple of emails. One from Leslie, who says, "Hello, Patrick. Congratulations on the first birthday of the Laurel and Hardy blogcast. I wanted to thank you for making this blogcast happen and the wealth of information that I devour each week. Your choice of guests have been enlightening and entertaining. I especially like your light-hearted attitude that you bring to the blogcast, which also mirrors the subject matter. But my favourite part is at the end of each episode where I like to mime the goodbyes," which is brilliant. Thank you, Leslie. And Adam also writes, and he says, "Hey, Patrick, happy first birthday to the Laurel and Hardy blogcast. Thank you for making my lockdown walks more relaxing with all the episodes so far. I particularly enjoyed your 9th episode when you had Randy Skretvedt, author of the Laurel and Hardy, The Magic Behind the Movies, on the show. After hearing it, I had to purchase his book and currently still reading away. All the very best for another nice year of podcasts you got me into." Thank you, Adam. That's brilliant. And yeah, stick around. Randy's going to be with us in just a few moments for yet another brilliant episode, I'm sure. And it's great to hear, actually, that Adam there, he's listening to the blogcasts on his walks. Christopher Johnson, who was also with us on episode 8, he also listens while he's either walking or in the car. Fred let me know recently that he listens whilst running. So, Fred, come on, pick up the pace. We could do with another 5K, I think, this evening. John got in touch to say, "I usually like to save it for the weekend. It's a treat after a busy week. I have to say it has led me to acquiring the newly restored collection and also the solo works." Well done, John. Well done. Nick got in touch recently. He said he wakes up and sees the happiest of alerts on his phone. The Laurel and Hardy blogcast has a new episode. He says, "I eagerly snatch up earbuds and leash and walk with laughing gravy until she's worn out. And I listen to the rest of my favourite interview podcast with coffee, no crunchy breakfast until the 3 goodbyes, though, because I have to hear every word and bow-hunk note." Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. Ali listens while she's knitting or pottering around through her Bluetooth speakers. And Tony listens while preparing dinner in the kitchen. And Graham, again, who we've already heard from, he's been decorating a lot lately, and we've been accompanying him whilst decorating or when he's tidying or also cooking. Couple of chefs. Brilliant. Okay, guys, thank you so much for getting in touch. It means such a lot to hear from all of you. It's great to bring everybody under one roof. If you haven't joined the Blogheads community already, as you've heard just before, it is a great community to belong to, so please do look for us on Facebook under Blogheads Group.
No! Emphatically no!
And so, without further ado, let's get into today's episode properly, and we'll start off with today's audio blog. And today's film in focus is The Battle of the Century, filmed October 5th to October 29th, 1927. It was released on December 31st, 1927, produced by Hal Roach, directed by Clyde Bruckman, photographed by George Stevens, titles by H.M. Walker. The main cast: Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy, Noah Young, Charlie Hall, Eugene Pallett, Dorothy Coburn, and Anita Garvin. It's widely acknowledged that 1927 is an important year in the history of Laurel and Hardy for the main reason that this was the year that saw them develop into and become a well-established and widely loved comedy team. However, there is another reason that makes the year significant. 5 of the boys' films from this period were lost over time by the Roach Studios. Thankfully, most of these films have since been recovered, owing to the efforts and dedication of certain committed individuals prepared to scour the globe and chase down these elusive titles. Today, Hats Off remains the only Laurel and Hardy film still frustratingly missing in its entirety, along with large sections of the 1930 Technicolor operetta The Rogue Song. Among Stan and Babe's films that remained missing for decades was the 1927 silent two-reeler The Battle of the Century. Battle's history is an interesting one and incredibly stretches from its inception in late 1927 up to the end of 2020. The story begins, as all stories do, right at the beginning, and even though Clyde Bruckman took the directorial credits for the film, a large portion of its genesis, development and overall success can arguably be attributed to supervising director Leo McCarey. According to Wes D. Gehring, McCarey's father was a notable boxing promoter covering the west coast of the US, and as one of the main features of the picture is a parody of a famous heavyweight boxing match, it could be reasonably posited that it was Leo McCarey who came up with the idea for the picture. The actual sporting contest that Stan and Babe parodied in the film was held on September 22nd, 1927, just 1 month before shooting commenced, between Jack Dempsey and Gene Tunney. It was an eagerly awaited rematch and was promoted as the Battle of the Century. The victor of the bout was Tunney, despite him being knocked down in the 7th round. This incident gave the fight the historic nickname the Long Count Fight, due to the fact that whilst Tunney was on the canvas seeing stars, Dempsey wouldn't retreat to a neutral corner of the ring, delaying the referee's count. This ridiculous delay lasted so long that Tunney was eventually able to compose himself, stand up, continue to fight, and ultimately win. This farcical scene is reproduced at the start of the Laurel and Hardy film, with Stan as Canvasback Clump, better known as the Human Mop, gearing up to take on Thunderclap Callahan, who will probably win. Thunderclap is played by none other than the dangerously menacing Noah Young, returning again after terrifying the boys in their previous comedies Do Detectives Think and Sugar Daddies, and you'd be hard pushed to find a more frightening looking opponent. The laughs here are plentiful. Stan's warm-up routine is hilarious, as is his boxing style, as he leaps and prances across the ring towards Callahan, who is hastily trying to get his gloves tied on. The comedy in these scenes mostly comes from Stan, but Ollie's reactions to Stan's belly-out stance during the face-off and his little glances into the camera are wonderful. This is such visual comedy delivered with absolute perfection by 2 masters of their craft. Despite the importance of the film's link to the historic Dempsey-Tunney clash, the Battle of the Century is most well known today for its second reel, specifically the Grand Pie Fight finale. As usual, the boys work themselves into a situation where a small altercation with one individual, on this occasion pie delivery man Charlie Hall, quickly escalates into a scene of mass carnage, drawing into it everyone in literal striking distance. The legendary notoriety of this finale, however, is not to do with the throwing of the pies per se, it's all to do with the scale of the conflict, with estimates of pies thrown varying between 3,000 and 5,000. By 1927, pie throwing in slapstick movies was seen as a very cliched and outdated thing, and eyebrows were raised at the Roach Studios when Stan Laurel originally suggested including a pie fight in their latest film. This extract from an article in the Los Angeles Times dated 29th of December 1927 tells the story. Quote, "It was Laurel's faith in the efficacy of pie throwing which turned the trick. Pies had been thrown, to be sure, on the Roach lot before. They were being thrown even in the comedy which Lionel Barrymore acted for Roach about 4 years ago, but only in moderation, 1, 2, perhaps 3 pies, and that was considered enough. Roach's comedies were clocking on average of 50 laughs in those days. Laurel approached the supervising director one morning and shyly suggested a way to raise the ante to 80. His method would consist simply and directly of throwing more pies. Not 1, not 2, not 10 or 20, but hundreds, even thousands. Pie throwing went out with the Keystone comedies," said the supervising director shortly. "Anything else, Laurel?" There was nothing else. just more pie throwing, and Laurel couldn't have that. The supervising director in time moved away into the feature field, and Laurel, sensing his opportunity, took his grand scheme to Roach. The producer, inclined to be generous with his brand new comic team, agreed to it as an experiment. So the Battle of the Century was made, and with it, history. The checkers, scarcely crediting their ears, clocked 110 laughs. It wasn't that we threw hundreds of pies, Laurel explained. That wouldn't have been very funny. It really had passed out with Keystone. We went at it, strange as it may sound, psychologically. We made every one of the pies count. A well-dressed man strolling casually down the avenue, struck squarely in the face by a large pastry, would not proceed at once to gnash his teeth, wave his arms in the air and leap up and down. His first reaction, it is reasonable to suppose, would be one of numb disbelief, then embarrassment, and a desire for revenge would possess him. If he saw another pie close at hand, still unspoiled, he would grab it and let it fly. That is what the innocent bystander did in the Battle of the Century, and audiences, sensing keenly his plight, relished it and his reaction to it. Thus, a new slow slapstick formula reapplied came into existence, and Roach, Laurel and Hardy prospered. As Wes D. Gehring expertly summarises in his biobibliography of the boys, it is this film, and particularly this finale scene, that Stan Laurel later identified as the first moment the team, including McCary, consciously changed the pace of the boys' comedy, allowing reaction to settle in before any retaliation commenced. From this small but incredibly significant change, their comedy evolved, ultimately developing into the trademark tit-for-tat contests that are so adored by the team's fans. The pie fight is unquestionably what the Battle of the Century is most known for. According to an interview, unusually with both Stan and Babe, conducted by Helen Louise Walker and published in Motion Picture Classic, June 1930, it wasn't just the hurling of pies that posed all the danger on set. Quote, "We made a picture not long ago in which we used more than 5,000 big gloopy custard pies. And most of those pies landed on me," said Laurel. "I guess more of them landed on me," retorted Hardy. "In the first place, there's more of me." We didn't mind the pies so much, though. You get used to pies in this business, but this was an outdoor set, and there were a lot of beehives not far away. The pies attracted the bees, and we were simply covered with the things. They couldn't sting us because of the stuff, the custard. It was too thick all over us, but they certainly gave us a lot of trouble. Following on from the success of the second 100 years, and hats off, Hal Roach's vision for his short subjects to receive equal billing with feature-length dramas became even more entrenched, and with good reason. Laurel and Hardy's popularity was growing at an astonishing rate with each new release. An article written by Whitney Williams in the Los Angeles Times, December 11th, 1927, explains, quote, "The two-reel comedy is at last having its day. It has simply come to the point whereby the two-reeler, provided it warrants the rating, will share equal billing with the longer production. The Battle of the Century, co-billed this week at the Metropolitan with Man, Woman and Sin, is evidence of this new scheme, a step that doubtless betokens similar theatre procedure across the country. Produced by Hal Roach, these comedies and their important placement on theatre bills realise a dream long held by Roach. Roach, recognised as one of the cleverest of comedy producers, has always felt that humour in films should not be subservient to drama. He believes, and his contention is a very logical one, that a good two-reel comedy is received with the same acclaim by an audience as the seven-reel feature production. To this end, Battle was afforded the same large-scale level of marketing as had proved so worthwhile in the promotion of Hats Off, and the Film Daily, December 8, 1927, reported, quote, "When the two-reel Roach comedy The Battle of the Century opens at the Metropolitan next week, Harold B. Franklin, general manager of West Coast Theatres, will back it with a big advertising drive. As one phase of the campaign, 124 sheets will be posted in Los Angeles. Special newspaper space will be used in addition to that which is ordinarily occupied by the Metropolitan. 2 special newspaper ad cuts are being prepared. A trailer will also be used in connection with the wide exploitation. All key points in the Southern Division will use trailers, cuts, stories, lobby cards, and snipes. A special radio hookup is being arranged for Laurel and Hardy. The Egyptian will run the picture 2 weeks after the Metropolitan, and all other deluxe houses a week later." Resurrecting a comedy device that was widely acknowledged as dead, or at the very least dying, was a brave move for Messrs. Roach, Laurel, Hardy and McCary, But it was a gamble that paid off handsomely. In Exhibitors Herald and Motion Picture World, February 11th, 1928, the proprietor of the Dayton Theatre, Ohio, wrote, "Absolutely the best comedy I have ever played, and I don't mean maybe. Hal Roach comedies are in a class all by themselves." Equally approving was a review in The Record, December 13th, 1927. "What is hailed as the funniest comedy since Charlie Chaplin's Shoulder Arms is now hilariously entertaining Metropolitan Theatre audiences. The comedy that has created a veritable sensation co-stars Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy in the Battle of the Century. The initial co-starring vehicle of the newest screen team is packed with wicked wallops, laughing thrills, and rib-tickling situations calculated to upset the equilibrium of the most blasé grouch." Now, for the sake of balance, it should perhaps be noted that it wasn't all confetti and ticker tape. 2 years after the release of the film, Battle was still playing in some theatres, arguably illustrating its popularity, but even so, the Standard Union, June 12, 1929, reviewed it thus. "The Hal Roach comedy starring Laurel and Hardy is either so old or so stupid that the action, supposedly hilarious, involves the time-worn casting of custard pie and other equally messy foodstuffs." This negativity was the exception rather than the norm. The Battle of the Century was a huge hit with theatre owners and their audiences, but sadly, as discussed earlier, after 1930 the film disappeared and was not seen again for a couple of decades. Then, in the late 1950s, filmmaker Robert Youngson was putting together a film entitled The Golden Age of Comedy, which was in essence a compilation of scenes from some of the classic comedies of the silent era. Youngson was determined to include the Battle of the Century's grand finale, but all he had to work with was a partially decomposed negative of the film. The first reel was in such bad condition that it was a complete write-off, and the second reel had also started to decompose. So he salvaged what he could, transferring footage from the volatile nitrate film to safety stock. The remaining usable footage was then edited into, as Glenn Mitchell describes, a fast-paced and admittedly very effective summary. The footage on this second reel, albeit incomplete due to the decomposition, contained the pie fight to end all pie fights, up to and including Anita Garvin's slip, splat and exit. And it's these scenes that Robert Youngson was so keen to include in the compilation. Then, in 1975, as author Randy Skretvedt informs us, the missing first reel containing the boxing match sequence was discovered by Leonard Maltin in the vaults of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. But true to form, this print was also not complete, missing the last 4 minutes or so. Then jump forward to 2015 and reports begin to circulate online stating that film archivist Jon Mirsalis had discovered in the personal collection of a deceased film collector named Gordon Burko a 16mm print of the second reel containing the important missing footage. The news was greeted with great excitement and the complete second reel was entrusted to film restorer Serge Bromberg for preservation and ultimately preparation for public release. Now, although still missing a small sequence from Reel 1, the now almost complete Battle of the Century was released on June 16, 2020 on DVD and Blu-ray by Kit Parker Films as a highlight of the Laurel and Hardy Definitive Restoration set. And in one final twist to Battle's story, for the time being at least, on December 14th, 2020, the Battle of the Century was included amongst the annual selection of the 25 most influential American motion pictures and was duly inducted into the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress. These films are specially selected because of their cultural, historic or aesthetic importance to the nation's film heritage. So, after 93 years from the date of its production, this legendary picture has finally been granted the respect it deserves.
You don't believe me.
Yes, I don't believe... What do you mean you don't believe me?
Now, this next clip that I want to play for you comes courtesy of the lovely people at the Niles Film Museum, and it's a clip of Jon Mirsalis himself talking, in his own words, about his discovery of the all-important Reel 2 of Battle of the Century.
So Gordon was a collector who began collecting in the 1940s when he was a teenager, but he had amassed a very large collection, and he passed away in 2004, and he was a very well-to-do attorney. And so he had the money to acquire, and he started early, and so he had the connections as well. And so he had this very large collection. It's too long of a story to go into here, but it was, the family didn't know what to do with it when he passed away. He was kicking around. They were paying storage on it for about 10 years. And so they finally, through a couple mutual friends, they contacted me. I knew him. We had been friendly, but this was his daughters who'd gotten the collection. But I made a deal to take over and help liquidate the collection for him. It was 4 tons of film. 2,323 films. And so when I got this enormous collection, and it completely filled my theater. I mean, I couldn't even move. And I had a kind of tiny little channels where I could squeeze through to get the films. And so I would be, as I could sort, I'd go through and I'd say, the tinted print of the Iron Mask. I said, I want that. I'm keeping that. Set that aside. And then, Psycho, let's sell that. And so I gradually started working my way through. Well, as the pile started getting to the point where I could start to move and sort, I would come across other things. And I would find titles, and I'd say, Cops, Buster Keaton. Oh, I have a print that's really common. It's not worth very much money. Set it aside. I'll get to this later. I want to sell the valuable stuff to get the most money out, and I want to sell the features to make space. And as I'm sorting through, I come across a thing that says Battle of the Century, Reel 2. Well, the nitrate negative of Battle of the Century decomposed. It was lost, as many silent nitrates were. And most of Reel 1 survived, the prize-fed sequence, so there's little bits that are missing. But then in the 1950s, there was a gentleman named Robert Youngson, who was a producer at Warner Brothers, and he was very interested in silent film era, which he'd grown up with as a kid. And he started producing a number of compilation films, and he would get clips of these famous silent films that he loved, and they released them theatrically, and they were very successful. The films did very well, and they played on television, and I saw some of them growing up as a kid. I saw these on TV. And what he would do is he had deals with the studios, and he would just get various prints. So, and what he would do, apparently, I've surmised this from what I've seen, is that it was very expensive to work in 35 millimeters, so he would ask for 16 millimeter preview prints. Again, this was pre-video days. And they'd send him a 16 millimeter print. And then he would say, okay, in Buster Keaton's Cops, I want to use from 3 minutes and 4 seconds to 5 minutes and 7 seconds. And then the lab would strike him from the camera negative, a beautiful 35 millimeter negative of that little snippet, and that kept his costs down. So he's not printing up, thousands and thousands of feet of 35 millimeter, which was expensive. And so Youngson used a bit of the pie fight sequence in one of them. I think it's Golden Age of Comedy. There's about 2.5 minutes of the pie fight, and so that's all we've seen in the pie fight. And that was readily available to collectors, and I have a print of it. So I finally pick up this can, Battle of the Century, Reel 2. And I say, okay, and what I did with most of these things is I would put them on the projector, I'd screen the first minute or two, and then I would, and I'd say, it's the Black Hawk print, it's a good original, it's a bad dupe. I'd make some notes, and then I'd know how to list it when I sell it. And so I pop open the can, and I go, oh, that's interesting, it's a full reel. I thought, well, that's not right, because the full reel doesn't exist. And so what Gordon used to do is he sometimes would splice stuff onto the end. I said, I'll bet I know what this is. It's the fragment of Reel 1 and Reel 2, and they're cut together. So fine. So I put it on the screen, and it comes up, and beautiful original, it's the original MGM title, Begin Battle of the Century, Reel 2. And I go, huh. And I'm watching this scene, and Stan and Ollie are walking down the street, and there's a banana seller, and I go, I don't remember any of this. This isn't in my print. And I watch and watch and watch, and this pie fight's longer than I remember. And it goes through, and it gets to the end, and I look up, and that's the end of the reel, and I realized I've watched all of Reel 2 of Battle of the Century. And your heart starts going, boom, 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 boom. And so I quickly erased, I found my print. Well, let's look at, this is a full 400-foot reel, and my print's about that. I look at my print, and I said, oh my gosh, I've got Reel 2 of the Battle of the Century. That's a lost film. And maybe that didn't, and so it turns out, I skipped a part, Gordon, William K. Everson, and Herb Graff, 3 kind of legendary collectors, went in and bought the Youngson collection from Youngson's widow in 1990. And Bill Everson only wanted 3 films, Past the Gravy, which some of you have seen out here before, was one of them. I don't know what the other two films. I've asked his widow. She says, I remember the transaction, don't remember what the films were. Herb Graff wanted most of the sound films, and Gordon got most of the silent material. So what he had was Youngson's preview prints of Reel 2 of Battle of the Century. And so I thought, well, gosh, I think this is very rare. And in last March, I was at the Syracuse Cinefest, and I bumped into Chris Horak, who's the director of the UCLA Film Archive. And UCLA, as we speak, is restoring all Laurel and Hardy films. They just, some of you were at Cinecon last year. And I said, hey, Chris, I have Reel 2 of the Battle of the Century if you need it. And he said, oh, really? Oh, that's nice. And I thought, well, okay, they probably have the camera negative. I just, it's probably rare in 16 millimeter, but it's not a big deal. So I just thought, well, that's nice. I now have something, other collectors don't have. I have the complete Reel 2. And then in June, there's a festival the Library of Congress does called Mostly Lost. It's a combination of film identification and running archival films. And they have speakers. And they had asked me to speak about the Burkow collection and about, I'm involved with them with a project now where we're actually doing digital transfers on films from private collectors that don't exist in any archives anywhere in the world. And so I was giving a talk, and I mentioned this in passing. I said, as an example here, I've got all of Reel 2, and there was a gasp in the room. Just a, and this is a room full of the archivists from Museum of Modern Art and the Library of Congress and all these other archives, and they gasped. And I'm thinking, well, is it rare or is it not rare? And I got mobbed afterwards, and they said, that's the only print. They said, it doesn't exist anywhere.
So again, thanks to the Niles Film Museum and to Jon Mirsalis himself for their permission to play that clip. What a story. I can't help but think that, a story like that gives us hope for the discovery of Hats Off. Fingers crossed. The clip we've played there, it actually comes from a long video that you can find on the Niles Film Museum's YouTube channel, so do check that out. So now we come to my favourite part of the episode, our special guest. I should probably apologise as well. Obviously, Randy and I are discussing the Battle of the Century, but I'm afraid I did lead Mr. Skretvedt off script a little bit, and we do talk about one or two things which are a little bit further down the Laurel and Hardy timeline. Slap my wrist, but I've left them in as I found the conversation really interesting, and I'm sure you will too. So get your custard pies at the ready. This one could get messy. Our returning guest today is a man who has dedicated his life to researching the lives and careers of Stan and Babe. His books, Laurel and Hardy, The Magic Behind the Movies, and the Laurel and Hardy movie scripts are the go-to resources for all you could ever want to know about the films of Laurel and Hardy. So it is with great pleasure that I welcome back to the blogcast, Randy Skretvedt.
Thank you, Patrick. Very happy to be here.
It's great to have you back, Randy. The previous episodes that we spoke on have been really, really popular. So thank you very much for that. It's been fantastic seeing the response come in from all the listeners. So it's great to have you back on again. And I'm sure we're going to have another very, very interesting chat today. We're looking at the Battle of the Century, 1927. Before we get into it, how are you, and what have you been up to since we last spoke back in December, I think it was?
Well, I'm doing fine. The past month or so, I've been immersed in the other subject that I write about frequently, which is music of the 1920s and early 30s, primarily the dance bands. And I've been working on the booklet notes for Volume 3 of a series of CDs devoted to Irving Aronson and his Commanders. And that may not be a familiar name to you, but likely you've heard his record of Let's Misbehave, which shows up in a lot of movies. Woody Allen has used it a couple of times, and it's really one of the signature recordings of the 1920s. And it was a terrific band, and so I'm very lucky to work with a guy named Brian Wright, who has a company called Rivermont Records. He does a lot of new recordings of ragtime and reissues a lot of great records from the 1920s and 30s. And I've written booklet notes for him before, so I've been involved in lots and lots and lots of research. Booklet notes like that might not be all that lengthy, but they do require a lot of research.
Yes.
So I've been working on that for the past month solidly, and hope to get it finished in the next few days. So that's what I've been working on, but also working on a forthcoming book, I hope by the fall of this year, on Babes in Toyland in its many, many forms. Originally, it was a Broadway musical in 1903, and ever since then, in the Laurel and Hardy movie, the Disney movie, several television productions, a TV movie, and an animated movie, every one of them has a different storyline, because the original from 1903 is so gory and so filled with beatings and poisonings and murders. Right. Why this was intended for children in 1903, I don't know, but evidently kids of that era loved stuff that was gory, and so Victor Herbert gave it to them. But with the implementation of the production code in 1934, you would never have been able to use that story. So every subsequent production has had a different story somehow. Most of them borrowing from the Laurel and Hardy one, by the way, more so than the real story from 1903. So anyway, that has a fascinating story all by itself, and that's what I'm working on primarily.
Oh, looking forward to that. That sounds excellent. And so you think by sort of autumn of this year?
I'm hoping to have it out well before Thanksgiving, because here in the States, that film has been a Thanksgiving tradition in New York City ever since the late 1940s on television. The film is now owned by WPIX Television in New York City, and they have run it every Thanksgiving since 1963, but sporadically since 1948.
Wow.
They were in fact the first television station in the States to run Laurel and Hardy films.
Wow.
Starting in 1948. So anyway, they have really helped keep that film alive in our popular culture. And I will have a chapter all about that aspect of the story too, because they really kept the Laurel and Hardy film alive for many years.
Fantastic. Well, that's brilliant. And that's quite interesting, because the Battle of the Century, obviously, I mean, that has a span going from 1927 right up to December of last year, in fact, when it was inducted into the National Film Registry. You know, It has a whole kind of story arc, which is just really, really interesting. Before we get into discussing the film, Randy, what I thought I better just mention is the copy of the film that we are talking about is on the definitive restorations on the Blu-ray.
Yes.
Because that is the only place, correct me if I'm wrong, that you can actually see the almost full-length film now.
It is the only way that you can purchase a copy of it to have and run at your leisure. It has sneaked onto YouTube a couple of times, I think, but really the way to see it, and it has a very nice score too, by the way. There are a couple of actual different restorations of it. Serge Bromberg at Lobster Films did one which incorporated the 35 millimeter material from the second reel that was in the golden age of comedy. But I like this one better because the second reel is entirely from the 16 millimeter print that Jon Mirsalis found a few years ago. And that way it's more consistent, and it doesn't keep going back and forth from 35 to 16 to 35 to 16, which is a little bit jarring. And it kind of takes you out of the movie and makes you more aware of the print quality and not focusing on the story and on the gags, which really should command your attention.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I've got to say, in terms of quality, on this definitive restoration set, that Battle of the Century print is just beautiful. Yeah. And then, as you say, obviously the first reel and the second reel is it's bridged by a couple of production stills, right, and a little explanation as to what happened in those 4 minutes that are still sadly missing. But I guess because of that, you don't notice the difference in 35 to 16 millimeter.
Right.
Yeah,
and the 16 still looks very, very good. I mean, it's not like it's you're not looking at standard 8 or something. It's still very sharp. So yeah, it's lovely, and it has that really lovely sort of golden tint as well to it. Well, we can talk about that more thoroughly as we get into
jumping ahead. Yes. Okay, fabulous. So really, I mean, And what I wanted to say as well, of course, is, if people haven't picked up the Blu-ray or the DVD set yet, there is a fabulous commentary track by Richard W. Bann, all about the Battle of the Century and how it was discovered and restored, and all of that whole story is just fascinating to listen to. And Richard does a great job. So, it's worth picking it up just for the commentary tracks. Which you did most of course.
I did 19 of them. There are 21 films, and I did 19 of them. And Richard did Battle of the Century and The Music Box. But I did all the others, including That's That and The Tree in a Test Tube.
Yes.
Which are really not even listed as official films. They're part of the bonus material. By the way, some people have had trouble accessing those commentaries. If you have that set, they're under Setup. If you go to the menu and go to Setup, then there's commentaries and also English language subtitles. So just click on for the commentaries if you want to hear my comments for whatever little value they may have.
Oh, it's fabulous. Well, I mean, it's great because you get to watch the films in superb quality, and then you get to watch it again with all the extra information that you and Richard are giving. So it's fabulous. It's a fabulous set.
Yeah, I'm kind of spoiled by them now because... of course, I worked on this for a solid year, putting together the photo galleries. Richard supplied the photos that were actually from the films, and I supplied photos that were from other candid shots and things from family collections and that sort of thing. But I assembled all the galleries, and I wrote commentaries and delivered commentaries and supplied interview material, both audio and visual. So it was a full year adding, because we have 9 hours of extras. Along with 9 hours of film. But I was going to say that having basically gotten used to the restoration of the Music Box, which has sound material from, I don't know where these existed, but they found pre-mix elements. In other words, the 35 millimeter optical film that was recorded there at the location or at the studio before they put it all together to make the final mixed soundtrack. So first generation audio. And they found all this and then remixed it. And so you hear wind rustling through the microphone, and you hear dogs barking in the neighborhood. All these things which about 3 weeks ago on one of our television stations here, they run Laurel and Hardy on Saturday mornings. And they ran an older transfer of the Music Box. And it looked okay, but the soundtrack just had this tornado of noise over the dialogue, and it was what I was used to in previous viewings. And so now, having gotten used to this and having the sound being so very clean, I just went, wow, that is a noisy soundtrack. You never realize how poor some of these things are until you see what they were supposed to look and sound like.
Yes.
So that's why I really do hope that there can be further restorations as the years go by. They take a lot of time and a lot of money, but they're certainly worth the time and expense.
Yeah, which is why everybody should support the project and buy the discs, because obviously that then funds the next project. So absolutely right. No, somebody mentioned on social media, they made a comment when they first came out that it was like putting on the pair of spectacles for the first time and seeing crystal clear for them, and that's absolutely right. It's beautiful. Yeah, a fantastic set. And I always do put links to the set. There's an affiliate link that you can purchase the sets from on the show notes and also on the website as well. So that's easy to do. Very, very easy to do.
There is a company called Deep Discount, which oftentimes has the best price, and they will ship to England. You have to buy it. You have to buy it from an American-based retailer because we only have rights for the Northern Hemisphere. But you can get from American retailers that will ship worldwide. And Deep Discount tends to have the best price, and they will ship anywhere. So that's a suggestion.
That's great. I think that might be where I had mine from. I'm pretty sure you can get it on Amazon UK though now.
I think you can. I'm pretty sure you can.
Yeah. Fantastic. Right. Okay, let's get into it then, Randy. So we are talking about the Battle of the Century, released on New Year's Eve, I think it was, 1927.
Yeah, we always think of it as a 1927 film, but obviously most of the theatrical engagements were 1928. And I know for a fact that it was in Los Angeles in March of 1928 because Oliver Hardy, in his scrapbooks, had several newspaper clippings of reviews and newspaper ads for the engagement that was at the Egyptian Theater. And in the Blu-ray, in the gallery, the photo gallery for the Battle of the Century, there are several photos showing the Egyptian theater, which is still there and still running movies on Hollywood Boulevard. It was built in 1922, and it's still there. And you see this usher in a wonderful military-style uniform, and he's standing by a glass standee for the feature film, which was John Gilbert in Man, Woman, and Sin, plus the supporting program of Laurel and Hardy in the Battle of the Century. And it was a very highly promoted film. That film and Hats Off, both of which ironically have been missing in action for many decades. Yeah. Those were the two films that were highly promoted by Hal Roach to really make the public aware of his new team. And I have a lot of the promotional material for Hats Off because Oliver Hardy had it, and I bought a collection of his material back in 1979. Battle of the Century also. A lot of the Hal Roach studio vehicles went around town with little posters all over them promoting Battle of the Century. There was a full billboard ad made for it, which is highly unusual for a short comedy. So it was particularly promoted, as was Hats Off. And that might have some reason, that might have something to do with the fact that both of those films were missing. Maybe they were just printed until the negatives wore out. Who knows? But in any event, we're very, very lucky to have Battle of the Century. And of course, you look at it now on the new Blu-ray, and you would think that it had been lovingly preserved for almost 90 years. Well, when you get the full story, you realize it was reclaimed at the 11th hour. I mean, even the 16 millimeter copy, which comprises reel 2, is now going through vinegar syndrome, and I think by now would be unusable. So that was, thank goodness, that was caught in the nick of time. Wouldn't it have been particularly sad to discover that reel, but find that it was unusable? That would really have been a tragedy. So thank goodness that Jon Mirsalis, finally, among the many owners of that can of film, decided to open it up and realize that it was not just the 3 minutes that Robert Youngson used in the golden age of comedy. But we'll talk about that in detail a little bit. We should probably talk about the origin of the film and the inspiration for the film. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, it was based on the Jack Dempsey, Gene Tunney prize fight. They were both boxers, and they had a prize. They had met in September of 1926, and that was a very popular fight. And so they had a rematch at Soldier Field in Chicago on September 22nd, 1927, billed as the Fight of the Century. And it has gone down in history as the long count fight. And that is because in the 7th round, Dempsey knocked down Tunney, but Dempsey failed to go to a neutral corner of the ring. In other words, one where the trainers were not there. And so Dempsey remained standing over Tunney, who was sitting there on the canvas. And when he finally went to a neutral corner, Tunney had been down for about 8 seconds. And so the referee counted to 9 before Tunney finally got up. Had Dempsey gone to a neutral corner, Tunney probably would have been counted out, and that would have been the end of the fight. But no, Tunney got up and then dominated Dempsey for the last 2 rounds, and Tunney won. So a lot of people are saying, well, Dempsey should have won if he would have gone to a neutral corner. Well, so it's a controversial fight even now. The happy outcome of the story is that Dempsey lifted Tunney's arm and said, "You were the best." And they became good friends, and they visited each other frequently for the next several decades. So that's a nice coda to that story, that nobody held a grudge. So anyway, that fight and the long count were the inspiration. And of course, if you know the first reel, there is a scene where Stan is confused after he has unwittingly knocked out Noah Young. And Hardy's going, go over there to that corner. And Stan has no idea what he's supposed to do. And by the time Stan figures it out, Noah Young has revived. So that's a direct relation to what happened in the Dempsey-Tunney fight. And as I say, that fight was September 22nd. So they started filming Battle of the Century on October 5th. So about 2 weeks after the fight, they were already in production. So that, that's something to know. It was a topical film at the time. Yes. Most Laurel and Hardy films deal with universal themes and topics. They don't deal with things that are in the news, but that is one exception. So something also kind of interesting. Of course, Lou Costello, or Louis Cristallo as he was known, is an extra in the boxing scenes, which were actually shot at a Culver City boxing auditorium. And once you notice Lou Costello, you can't take your eyes off him because he's quite prominent. He's down in the front. And at one point, he even does his little two-finger whistle that he used to do with Abbott. He would put his pinky and his index finger in his mouth and do that kind of whistle. And he does that in as an extra. We know that he was doing stunt work and extra work at MGM at the time because he doubled for, I think, Dolores Costello in Trail of 98. Which was a very rough and tumble film on location. So we know that he was working at MGM at the time, or working in films at the time. And Lois Laurel, Stan's daughter, said that Lou Costello and Stan Laurel were good friends and that Lou came over for dinner several times. So that's interesting, especially given that Abbott and Costello were really eclipsing Laurel and Hardy in the early 40s and becoming the new popular comedy team in America. So Stan obviously did not have any ill feeling toward Lou in that regard.
Yeah, that's nice to know, isn't it?
Yes. Something else, too, is that the film was shot Wednesday, October 5th through Thursday, October 13th, and that was supposed to be the last day of filming, but it took quite a bit longer. Stan was ill. He was prone to having bouts of the flu, and they were off for 2 weeks, and they came back on October 27th. They had to stop the next day because it was raining, and then they finished on Saturday, October 29th. But then the director, who was Clyde Bruckman, we always say Bruckman, but it's Bruckman, he did some retakes on Saturday, November 12th. And as you say, the film was released on New Year's Eve Day, December 31st of 1927, and played around the country through the spring of 1928. And not only do I have the script, the actual script, I also have some of the call sheets, which tell who was cast, who's supposed to be at the studio the next day, where they're supposed to be. And if anybody sees this, Anita Garvin is there, not Anita, but Nita, Nita, and they have under wardrobe circular skirt. Now, Anita has for years tell a story that she was working on a Charlie Chase picture. And indeed she was. She was working on a film called Never the Dames Shall Meet, which was filmed October 5th through 13th, exactly parallel with the first shooting of Battle of the Century. And as she remembered it, she was working on the Charlie Chase picture, and Stan Laurel asked her to do this one scene as a favor, which she did on her lunch hour away from the Charlie Chase film.
Yes, I was working with Charlie Chase, and Stan came over to our set, and he said, Anita, will you do a little thing for me? And of course, I loved him, so I would have done anything. And he wanted me to go to wardrobe, get a circular skirt, which I did, and then went down on his set. And that was made in about 15 minutes.
Now, the thing is, that may well have happened because she was basically called to work on two pictures at the same time. The only difference being that she was intended to be in the film. That we know that now because of the call sheet. So it was not just a spur of the moment thing. That he just said, "Hey, could you come over and do a part in the picture for me?" Because she was called on the call sheet, but she very likely did do this one scene for the Laurel and Hardy picture on her lunch hour from the Charlie Chase film. So she was not fibbing necessarily, because she really was working on a Charlie Chase picture at the exact same time that Battle of the Century was being filmed. And I'm sure that everybody at the Roach lot at the time that film was made was very much aware of it, whether they were working on that film or not, because Anita tells her story. I think it may be in the Super 8 interview that I did with her in 1981, which is on the Blu-ray. She said, and this is something that we would never think about. This is the great advantage of being able to talk to the people who were there. She said, every bee in Culver City made a beeline to the Hal Roach Studios back lot where they were doing the pie fight scene, because she said the aroma was overpowering. All of this sickly sweet pie filling And October is often the hottest month of the year in Southern California. We get hot, windy Santa Ana winds. And by the way, you can see in the scene where Laurel and Hardy are walking by the newsstand at the beginning, it's a very windy day. There, all these ties fluttering, and there's the magazines on the newsstand are flapping in the wind. So it was a typical hot Santa Ana day in October when they shot that. And you can imagine the hot sun bearing down on a lot with pie filling all over it. You can imagine what that's. I pity whoever had to do the cleanup on the New York street of the Hal Roach back lot. But she said every bee made a beeline to Culver City, and there we were. And Clyde Bruckman, the director, said, "Oh, don't worry, they're not going to sting you." And she said, "Yeah, well, who believed him, you know?" And people were trying to do their shot and get out of there as quickly as they could, you know. So
I'm glad you've said that, actually, Reddy, because I when I was writing my blog on the Battle of the Century, I came across an article in Motion Picture Classic, I think it was, where they interviewed Stan and Babe, unusually, together. And Babe and Stan talked about the bees. They actually talked about the bees as well. And I thought to myself, I wonder if that's just an interesting story they've concocted, but that actually confirms from two different sources. Yeah, it said, we made a picture not long ago in which we used more than 5,000 big gloopy custard pies. And most of these pies landed on me, sighed Laurel. I guess more of them landed on me, retorted Hardy. In the first place, there's more of me. We didn't mind the pies so much, though. You get used to pies in this business. But this was an outdoor set, and there were a lot of beehives not far away. The pies attracted the bees, and we were simply covered with the things. They couldn't sting us because of the custard. It was too thick all over us, but they certainly gave us a lot of trouble.
Well, there is a source that has eluded me. So if you could send me that in an email, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yes.
We can't find everything.
Absolutely, no. There's not time. No, I mean, I try to be as thorough as I can. I tend to go through the, on the lantern searches, the trade papers, and also through the local newspapers.com or whatever it is. Those are wonderful stuff you can come up with.
Those are wonderful sources, because back in the olden pre-computer days, I had to drive up to the Beverly Hills Library of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences 4 days a week. They were open from 10 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. And so for 6 hours, I would go through bound volumes of hard copy of all those trade papers. There was no index. And so I would just try to find Laurel and Hardy articles page by page by page. And if I found 12 or 15, that was a good day, And I would type them up on file cards or dictate them into a tape recorder and then type them up at home at night. But it was very slow and laborious, especially compared to the Lantern Media History website, where you can just type in a search box and immediately 5,000 articles show up. And it's just a wonderful boon for researchers.
Absolutely. Different world now, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So, but no, that's really nice to hear that, because that, obviously, as I say, confirms Stan and Babe's story.
Well,
wonderful.
She was there.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me wonder as well, with you saying about the call sheets, whether Stan and Laurel put her on the call sheet before she knew she was going to be in it. She'll do it. I'll go around and tell her. She'll do it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. This it says director. It says Brockman, but we know as Bruckman. Assistant director is Lloyd French. Prop men are Ted Driscoll. I don't know who LaPlante is. He's the second prop man, Laplante, like Laura LaPlante. And also camera is listed as Weller, and that too was an unfamiliar name to me. But this is for October 27th of 1927. So this is after they came back from Stan's illness. And let's see, we have Anita Garvin, circular skirt, George French, dentist coat. Dick Sutherland is he's the guy at the pie shop. Jack Adams, Emil O'Connor, Harry Timbrook, Arthur Munn, and Leo Sully, who I think is Leo Sulky. Though mostly unfamiliar names to me. So that's the great value of having call sheets, because they will identify some people that we heretofore have not known. The wardrobe called for is circular skirt, dentist coat, street clothes, derby hat, coveralls, mailman's uniform, so we know what day that little shot was taken, street clothes, and above wardrobe to be hit with pies. Hand props are 40 pies, dental chair and tools. Prop rose, so that must be the photographer, the guy with the holding the rose for the photographer. And oddly enough, even though that is usually credited as Billy Dooley. Evidently, it's not. Evidently, it's somebody else who looks like Billy Dooley, because he's the guy holding the prop rose. And it's Bob O'Connor is the photographer. Leather mailbag, canvas mailbag, mailbox, and 100 letters. And they also say they need a prop Ford. Don't know what that was for, but anyway, so that's what was needed on the on October 27th of 27. Everybody was supposed to be at the studio at 8:30 p.m. at the New York street set. So
that's a great insight, isn't it, into what goes on? Because you just take, I mean, as a punter, you just take so much of this for granted that it's the world is there that you're looking at, but they've actually had to decide how many letters to put in the post box. It's a great insight.
Well, that's also that shows you the acumen and the importance of Hal Roach, because he had to oversee all of this stuff for not only this film, but another 3 or 4 that were in production at the same time.
Yeah, of course.
Each of which needs its own crew, its own props, costumes, sets, etc. I mean, I'm always amazed at the quality of the set design in the Hal Roach movies, particularly in the silent era. I mean, those are elaborate sets. And they had their own scenery dock on the lot. They made their own scenery. They didn't borrow it from MGM, as William K. Everson always assumed and wrote in his Films of Laurel and Hardy book. No, they made everything there at the Roach studio. The thing is, they look very lavish. And even though those films were made very economically, they never looked cheap. They may have been low budget, but he put the money where it was necessary. And of course, you can reuse sets. So, build them well, build them nicely, because they'll be reusable, and they were.
Yes,
In Oliver the Eighth, you see a lot of the set that was used in Murder Case. So I mean, they were able to reconfigure sets and redress them and put them back together and reuse them many, many times. So, but they did a terrific job.
Yeah, I was going to just ask you, actually, when we were talking a minute ago about the advertising and all the, it was like Hats Off and Battle of the Century were very well publicised.
Mm-hmm.
Was that? I mean, I know, for a two-reel comedy that was unusual, but was that unusual for Roach comedies then? Was this the first time that he was pushing comedies of any of his series in that way?
Well, one thing to remember is he was newly affiliated with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, because that had started in September of 27. And while there was advertising done with his prior distributor, which was Pathé, I think MGM, which had only been around for about 3.5 years at that point, they started in 1924, but they had very quickly become the preeminent studio in Hollywood and had lots of money to spend on advertising, and did. So I presume that there was more advertising done for the MGM releases than for the Pathé distributed shorts. And I suppose that MGM probably wanted to do extra publicity on the short subjects because they were a new acquisition. The Roach product was a new acquisition, and they probably wanted to make people aware of it. I have yet to see billboards for Charlie Chase comedies or Our Gang comedies of the same period. Dick Van probably has 8x10 stills of that, but certainly it seems that Battle of the Century and Hats Off were promoted more so than the average Laurel and Hardy comedy would be. I think I do have a shot for a billboard for The Finishing Touch, which is a little bit later on. But, when they were just starting to get going, obviously they did not scrimp on publicity for this new team. They were really trying to make the public aware of them.
I think that's it, and I guess that's what makes me wonder about it, that they were such a new team, as you say, and to throw all of that sort of marketing materials at this brand new team when you've got an established series with Charlie Chase or Max Davidson, whoever, to suddenly think, right, we've got they must have really recognised the magic that they'd got there with Stan and Babe, and think, right, this is the place to channel that money.
I think audience reaction was such, which they were able to gauge. I think it's the Exhibitor Herald World is the trade paper that had a section called What the Picture Did for Me. And exhibitors, theater owners from all over the country would just write in and tell and say how a particular film did for them. And we have to remember, too, that movies in those days usually played for 3 days. And that was it, because it was like television. Everybody went to the movie to see it, and they had about 3 days to see it, and then the program changed, and they'd go see whatever that was for the next 3 days. The very, very limited time that you could see these films, which is also one reason why everybody went, because they knew that they did not have a month to see this picture. It was, and if something was held over for a second week, boy, that was really something. And they would trumpet that in the advertising, held over a second week, meaning that people probably went to see it a second or third time. But anyway, you can read these comments from theater owners and managers, and they will say, Laurel Hardy team, a laugh riot. Sometimes they say audience demanded we run it again.
Yes, I've seen that.
There's a great documentation of the impact that Laurel and Hardy made in their first pictures on the public, and that's very valuable to have. And so I think once, and clearly the people at the Roach Studios read that and were aware of it. And as I probably have mentioned earlier, Richard Currier, the day that I met him, which was his 88th birthday, which was August 26, 1980, Richard Bann and I were talking to him, and he said after the first few Laurel and Hardys, I went to the lab, which was run by a guy named Charlie Levin, and he said I told him to make 2 fine-grained master positives on every Laurel and Hardy instead of the usual one. Now, the fine-grained master positive is what you make right after the camera negative. And then you have the fine grain, or they also call it a lavender. And then from that, you make the negative, from which you then make the release prints. So you always go negative, positive, negative, positive. And so you would make a fine grain master positive to then make a negative to then make prints. And he said, I told Charlie Levin to make 2 of those on the Laurel and Hardys, because I knew if there was anything this studio was going to make that was going to be printed and reprinted, it was going to be the Laurel and Hardys. And he said he knew that, after the 3rd or 4th picture. So maybe he didn't quite do it in time for Battle of the Century or Hats Off, but he did do it, and that is likely why the Laurel and Hardy Silence survive much more handsomely than do the Charlie Chase or Max Davidson pictures of that same exact period, most of which are missing.
That's a good point.
From the 1927 to 29 period. And, it's always the late era Silence that are in most jeopardy, because they did not have time to be reprinted and reissued. Earlier films were reprinted, were reissued, and so there were more prints of them around. Films from 1927 to 1929 were being thought of as almost obsolete upon their release, because talkies were coming in at that same time. And so the thought of preserving these things, well, why bother? We're not going to be able to use them in 2 or 3 years. So that's what happened. Late era Silence are particularly vulnerable to being missing in action.
Yes, yeah, and of course Roach was very forward thinking rather than looking back and preserving what he'd
always.
Why are you people interested in all this old stuff I did?
He sounded a bit like W.C. Fields, really.
When I made Laurel and Hardy pictures, you know what I mean?
He said, "You know what I mean?" so much it all melded into one word.
You know what I mean?
And he said it a lot too, because when I was transcribing the interviews that I did with him, I had to edit out lots of those because it would just not have been. You would have read it and said, "This is not comprehensible." So I had to do a lot of polishing on the quotes there. But everything he said. I just had to knit them together and make them a little more understandable.
Fantastic. I can't imagine what it must have been like to be able to just sit and talk with Hal Roach and Anita Garvin. It's just, you're so lucky. So I was born in the wrong era.
With Mr. Roach, it was like talking to God. I mean, my life, he had such an incalculable effect. What would my life have been without Hal Roach? I mean, no Laurel and Hardy. They have been the governing force in my life since I was 5. So what would I have done? And Anita Garvin, too, she was always my favorite of the supporting players, long before I met her, because she was the one who knew the value of underplaying. Everybody else was very theatrical. Jimmy Finlayson was very explosive, and Charlie Hall and Walter Long, they were sort of florid, you know. And Anita Garvin knew how you could get a laugh just by nothing, just by, like Jack Benny, just by, just standing still and looking, you could get a huge laugh. I remember asking her about that. I said, did somebody, direct you for that? She said, no. She said, I just figured that if you're in a long shot, you play it more broadly. If you're in a medium shot, you play it less broadly. And if you're in close up, all you have to do is think it, because you're magnified so many times that any flick of the eye will be writ large on the screen. It's the opposite of being a stage actor. A stage actor, even if you're in the front row, a stage actor is tiny, and so they have to overdo things to be seen. Whereas a film actor is magnified 300 times on the screen. So they used to say about Gary Cooper, people who would watch him on the set would say, "This is the dullest actor I've ever seen in my life. He doesn't do anything." And then they would see the rushes, and he would be brilliant, and they'd go, "Oh, okay, he knows exactly how much to do for the camera," and that's what counts in film acting. So it's a very different skill from stage acting. But anyway, yes, I was very blessed to meet Anita and hear her stories about Battle of the Century and other films in which she appeared.
Well, that certainly is big of you.
Do you want to hear about the script? Should I tell you about some of the differences in the script, which I'm very blessed to have, and thank you to the wonderful, kind person in the UK who surreptitiously got these and scanned them and sent them to me. I mentioned the boxing sequence is quite a bit different. The opening sequence says, fade in on announcer in center of ring announcing the fighters for the main event. He introduces Noah Young, who obviously was cast right from the get-go, and then introduces Stan as substituting for Slaughterhouse Riley, who got cold feet and ran out. So if Slaughterhouse Riley got cold feet, that tells you that the as yet unnamed canvasback clump would really be in trouble. The opening scene was different. The boxing scene, basically, the main difference is Stan did land a lot of roundhouse rights on Noah Young, but they had no impact on him whatsoever. He brushed them away as if a fly was buzzing near him. So that's one thing, is that Stan actually does punch Noah Young many times, but it just doesn't have any effect on him. And then the insurance man was supposed to be played not by Eugene Pallett, but by Del Henderson. And we know Del Henderson is the eccentric millionaire in Wrong Again, who wants Blue Boy put on the piano. And also he's a judge in Our Relations, also a member of the same fraternity that Stan and Ollie are members of. So we know him from several films, and he was supposed to be the insurance man. And that was a little bit more elaborate, the sequence was. They were supposed to be reading a newspaper that so chastised Stan's poor performance in this boxing match that he wasn't going to be able to box in this city any longer, because he was just thought of as a laughingstock. And so the insurance man comes up and he says, it wouldn't be a bad idea if you had some insurance, because that way you might be able to make some money on this guy. And he starts describing how much the insurance policy will pay on different kinds of injuries. And so they sign. And then there was a very elaborate sequence where the boys walk to where a grand piano is being hoisted outside a building on a pulley. And, Ollie gets the idea, well, X marks the spot, this piano is going up and down, trying to be lifted into a second story window. And so he thought, aha, here's my chance to have it crash down on Stan and make some money. And let's see, I'm pretty sure that it actually lands on Babe.
Well, it would do, yeah.
Yeah, anyway, it's a very elaborate sequence. And so that would have come before the beginning of the second reel, which we now see.
Right.
And let's see. The breakaway piano. Yes, there's that goes on for about a page and a half, which is a long time for a Laurel and Hardy script, because the whole script is only 4 pages. And anyway, there was a little bit more with the Charlie Hall character beforehand. Let's see. The insurance man came into the picture once again, and I think this was shot with Eugene Pallett after the policeman hit Stan on the head. And you see that bit where Stan's got that large lump on his head.
That awful lump.
Yeah. It says here, let's see, the cop gets up sore as hell and sees Stan holding the banana, walks over and removes Stan's hat. And by the way, this is the first time that Stan wears the derby that we remember mostly, with the flat brim and the thinner crown, which Tony Hawes, who was married to Stan's daughter, told me was an Irish children's derby. So we'll have to investigate that. Nevertheless, anyway, the cop removes Stan's hat and socks him with his club. The cop then bawls Stan's out and kicks the banana skin further down the street in front of a bakery shop. So in the script, it was the cop that actually put the banana peel in front of the bakery shop. The cop then exits. Babe looks at the bump on Stan's head, thinks of the policy, and taking it from his pocket, begins to study it as Henderson, that's the insurance man here, walks into the scene. Babe says, "Just the man we were looking for." Henderson asks what's the matter, and Babe indicates that Stan has been injured. Henderson raises Stan's hat, looks at the bump, and replaces the hat. He goes into his pocket, brings out a little folder, and starts looking to see the amount paid on bumps. He traces down until he comes to bumps, looks at it, and finds out that for bumps they pay 5 cents. He hands a nickel to Babe, and taking the policy, tears it up as he exits. So from that point on, the insurance policy was a moot point. It was no longer in effect. And then they go into the pie fight sequence. Basically, it's kind of left up to the ad-libbing ability of everybody in the scene. They don't have the Irish biddy with who's beating the dust out of her rugs.
The rug, yes.
Which was missing in Golden Age of Comedy. That was not in the Robert Youngson edit.
Yeah.
And that part, by the way, is a man in drag, as you might guess. It's played by Jack Lloyd. And if you see the movie The Lucky Dog, the very beginning of The Lucky Dog, there is a man in drag as an Irish biddy character, and she's the landlady who's throwing out of the apartment. Well,
I was going to say
that's Jack Lloyd, and he's wearing pretty much the same costuming 6 or so years later in Battle of the Century as the landlady who says, "Who threw that goober?"
That's right. What is a goober? Can you tell me what is a goober?
I have no idea. New slang to me. And he shows up. He's in Leave 'Em Laughing, and I think he's even an extra in Saps at Sea. So it's kind of interesting.
In the same costume again?
No. He's a man in Leave 'Em Laughing and Saps at Sea. So he was really there at the beginning of Laurel and Hardy's career, and also, the end of their Hal Roach career. So Jack Lloyd, an unsung hero. But anyway, let's see. They say they're talking about the pie fight, and basically, from this we go to cuts of a lady looking out of a second-story window getting a pie, a fellow in a Ford coupe, a lady with lorgnette in a swell car. We know that got filmed with Eleanor Vanderveer. A man coming out of store, and other incidental cuts until we pull back to long shot of the street, showing the street full of people involved in throwing pies. Now, and that's pretty much all they say about the pie fight as we have it in the film. However, there was supposed to be another sequence after that. So here we go. We then established the annual police parade. Shades of Buster Keaton's Cops.
Yes.
And we cut to an automobile decorated with bunting, in which is riding the mayor of the town, and beside him the chief of police. People applaud, and the mayor gets up and says, "I wish to congratulate Chief Ryan on the marvelous law and order he has prevailing in this city." The chief gets up to take a bow, and as he does, a pie lands flush in his face. So much for law enforcement. The chief calls all the police, and they start rushing the crowd, which starts to disperse, leaving Stan and Babe exposed to the camera. Stan and Babe run around a corner when a cop comes up behind them and, suspicious of their actions, accuses them of having started all the trouble. As he starts to arrest them, they stop him and go into a pantomime routine of how it all happened with the banana skin, the first officer, and the baker. This winds up with Babe becoming so enthusiastic with his demonstration that he forgets and puts the pie in the cop's face when showing what the baker did to him. The cop gets sore and picks up a pie, letting it fly at Babe. It misses Babe and hits the chief of police, who is coming around the corner. This again starts a pie fight, which builds up to a high spot for the final fade. So that was a sequence at the end, which evidently was deemed unnecessary. And of course, if you're having a police parade, you need lots of extras and lots of police uniforms. And as Roy Seawright said, they hit you over the head until you were black and blue that we had no money. They would come to me for special effects and say, Roy, what is the most economical way we can do this? So obviously that's why that was deleted, because you've already got a grand finale. Why do you need a police parade on top of it?
Yes.
And I haven't seen this, but let's see. I'm not sure if it's Battle of the Century, but anyway, it may have been. There's supposed to be a picture of a Roach short that had lots and lots of extras, and they're all lined up at the window where Mrs. Cash was the lady, appropriately named, who would disperse the money, and extras got $5 a day. And so there's this line of people all waiting for their $5 at the end of the shooting day from Mrs. Cash. I haven't seen that still, but Richard Bann has it.
Did you get paid, Bert?
I sure did.
Well, as soon as we get through eating, we'll go ashore and have a swell time.
All right.
Did you want to say something about Clyde Bruckman?
Oh, right, yes.
Who was the director?
Yes.
He is a fascinating and rather sad story, but it's pronounced Bruckman. We always say Bruckman, but it's evidently pronounced like a babbling brook, Bruckman. And he was primarily a writer, and we know of. There's about 125 credits on the Internet Movie Database. Undoubtedly, there were more for which he was not credited. He was born in San Bernardino, California on June 30th, 1894, so he would have been 33 when he directed Battle of the Century. And interestingly, there are so many people at the Hal Roach Studios who had a sports background. A lot of them were former boxers, like Edgar Kennedy. Leo McCarey's dad had run a training arena for boxers. And Beanie Walker was a sports writer for the Los Angeles Examiner. Well, by golly, so was Clyde Bruckman. He was a sports writer for the Los Angeles Times and for the Los Angeles Examiner before becoming a comedy writer. He also wrote some sports-oriented short stories for the Saturday Evening Post magazine. And we know that he was writing for shorts that were distributed by Universal in 1919 and 1920. By the way, there is a wonderful, the best outline of Bruckman's career I've found to date is a terrific book called Buster Keaton's Crew by a lady named Lyle Foote, Lislefoote, Lyle Foote, and it's called Buster Keaton's Crew, and has a terrific, very well-detailed section on Clyde Bruckman. So he was writing shorts starring the team of Eddie Lyons and Lee Moran, and then shorts starring Monty Banks, who subsequently became the director of Great Guns many years later. And he was writing for Buster Keaton from about 1921 onward. I think the second film that he had credit on, the first one was a short, but the second film was The General. And, he didn't direct that many films. He only has 21 directing credits, but they always tend to be among the best films that particular comic ever made. So he has The General. For Laurel and Hardy, he has Call of the Cuckoo, Putting Pants on Philip, The Battle of the Century, Leave 'Em Laughing, and The Finishing Touch. He worked a lot with Harold Lloyd and is credited as director on Welcome Danger, Feet First, and Movie Crazy. And with W.C. Fields, he made the great short The Fatal Glass of Beer at the Max Sennett Studio. And at Paramount, he did Man on the Flying Trapeze, and also did one of the better early Three Stooges shorts called Horses' Collars. But after unfortunately, he had a problem with alcohol, as did many, many movie people. And so after 1935, he was only working as a writer, not as a director. He got sued by Harold Lloyd a couple of times for reusing material that had been in Harold Lloyd movies. And unfortunately, one of those suits in the early 40s wound up being very, very expensive for Universal Pictures. They wound up paying in excess of $125,000 to Lloyd to settle the suit. Of course, Lloyd was already wealthy beyond anyone's wildest dreams, but it was just a matter of principle. Unfortunately, it really put the kibosh on Bruckman's career. And in the 40s and early 50s, really, he was only writing for shorts for Columbia. He did get some work thanks to his old buddy Buster Keaton when Buster was doing a television series. And he also worked on some of the syndicated Abbott and Costello television shows in the early 50s. But unfortunately, work became harder and harder to find. And he committed suicide when he was 60. Wow. He went into a restaurant in Santa Monica and went into the men's room and shot himself with a gun that he had borrowed from Buster Keaton, who obviously had no idea that he was going to use it for that purpose. So it's a sad story. He is remembered by people. There's an episode of the X-Files television show which has a character in it named Clyde Bruckman. And so if you do a Google for Clyde Bruckman, that shows up more than the real Clyde Bruckman. Oddly enough, Bruckman's father had owned a liquor store and had also committed suicide. So it's very interesting that there was this sort of unfortunate repeating pattern in the Bruckman family. But he certainly did direct several wonderful films. I was going to say, about Putting Pants on Philip, Leo McCarey insisted that he directed the inseam sequence. He said, nobody else wanted to do it. And he said, I was the only one who thought it was funny. So he evidently did that part of it. But Bruckman undoubtedly had talent because he was highly prized by Keaton and Lloyd. And I think both of them said that Bruckman was the best gag man that they ever had. So he was not without talent.
No, not at all. As you say, with some very, very good credits to his name.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh, what a sad end. That's terrible.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And supporting actors in Battle of the Century, of course, we have. Is this probably the? I'm just thinking about Charlie Hall. This is probably his not his first, but one of his most major roles with them.
I think
to
the
date.
first one with Laurel and Hardy is Love 'Em and Weep, where I believe he's a butler.
That's right.
But he does play two roles in Battle of the Century.
Oh, does he?
He's in very briefly a ringside announcer. You see him with a derby hat and a handlebar mustache. And he's got a little round carbon microphone, and he's not there very long, but you can tell that it's Charlie Hall. And of course, there's enough time elapsed between that section of the film and the section where he's the pie man that you're not supposed to notice that it's the same guy. Just as you're not supposed to notice, I think it's Sam Lufkin has two roles in Two Tars.
Right.
He's a pedestrian, and then he's one of the guys in one of the automobiles. So that does happen from time to time. And also Dorothy Granger in Hog Wild. She's Tilly the maid, and then she's the flapper girl who's crossing the mud puddle.
That's right.
Who diverts Stan's attention from the intersection that he goes through and almost gets hit. So
yes. I mean, you can forgive that one because she's facing away, but Charlie Hall's is pretty front and center in that.
I wouldn't have known that if she hadn't told me. I remember I was talking to her she would call me just out of the blue. We were not particularly close. I only ever saw her at Sons of the Desert banquets, but she was very nice, and she would just call me every once in a while just to say hello and how are you doing, which I was extremely flattered by, And so we were talking about that, and she said, I'm also the girl crossing the mud puddle. And I said, oh, really? I didn't know that. She, yes. She said, they always try to get their money's worth at Roach's. So that was her. So I wouldn't have known that if she hadn't just offered that information to me.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And Charlie Hall, obviously, in fact, I'm going to try and do an episode focusing more on Charlie Hall as we get a bit more into the films where he's a bit more prominent. And I've spoken very briefly with John Uller, who's Charlie's biographer.
Yes,
and he's going to come on, and we're going to talk a little bit about Charlie Hall. But just very briefly, Randy, what can you tell us about Charlie? Because I am a huge fan of.
Well,
Charlie Hall.
there's 3 books on Charlie Hall.
I've got 2.
There's On the Trail of Charlie Hall, which came out several years ago, and then there's the Dean McCown scrapbook. With all the wonderful photos, and then there's John Uller's
the photo archive.
So between the 3, Charlie is pretty well covered, and I know someone is doing a book on Finlayson now. So
that's right.
We'll with any luck that will come out soon, and we'll have something definitive about Jimmy. I saw a posting from the person who's writing this, and he said, almost everything that's been written about his formative years is wrong, and he was able to refute everything. And I said, well, I've unwittingly perpetuated all of this stuff because that's all that has come to light heretofore. So I said, well, if we do another edition of my Laurel Hardy book in another 20 years when I'm 82, then I'll have to make sure that I rectify those errors and have the correct information. But anyway, someone is busily working on a Finlayson. But Charlie was from Birmingham. And in fact, I understand that Stan would tell him to try to soft pedal the Birmingham accent and try to sound a little more Californian so that it was more understandable to American ears. And it's interesting if you listen to him in Come Clean, when he's the guy behind the soda fountain. At the beginning, he sounds like he's a native Californian, strawberry, pineapple, and vanilla. He sounds like he's from Culver City. The angrier he gets, the more the Birmingham comes out. No, I don't have any chocolate. It starts. The true Charlie starts bubbling to the surface.
That's it.
And so I always thought that was kind of amusing.
Good evening. Good evening, sir. What can I do for you, sir? We'd like a quart of your best ice cream, please. Yes, sir. What flavor? What flavors have you? Strawberry, pineapple, and vanilla. What flavor do you want? I'll have chocolate. I'm sorry, but we're out of chocolate. Have you any mustachio? No, we're out of mustachio. You're out of mustachio? Yes. He's out of mustachio. Mm-hmm. What other flavors are you out of? Strawberry. We're out of orange, gooseberry, and chocolate. All right, I'll have it without chocolate. Didn't the gentleman just tell you that he didn't have any chocolate? I just told the gentleman I didn't want it. Just give us a quart of any kind that's handy, please. Yes, sir. What flavor's that? Chocolate.
I was surprised when I first went through the Hal Roach payroll ledgers to realize that he was more frequently employed as a carpenter at the studio than as an actor. And, at the time of his death, he was working in the prop department at Warner Brothers. So that was what he did primarily. He worked in prop departments and built sets and did that sort of thing. That's how he came here. He came to New York at first and worked in a cannery. And I think he said, well, if I'm going to be in the States, I may as well be somewhere where the weather is nicer. And so he went to Los Angeles, and there was always carpentry work at the movie studios because they were always building sets. And he was working on a Stan Laurel solo picture, which one now escapes me, but that's how he got into films. It's almost like Jerry Lewis's story, his phony story about Babe being a prop man.
Which one?
And Stan said, oh yeah, let's use the fat guy. Well, that is kind of how Charlie Hall got into movies, is they needed a guy who was short as a supporting player or as an extra in a Stan Laurel picture. And they called him over from the crew, and evidently that's how he got into being in front of the camera. So that's what I understand anyway. I'm not, I don't have chapter and verse in front of me, but that is what I remember. And
I think I remember you saying about these in an interview I had you on YouTube, I think, a while ago, and you said about him being on the payroll more for being a carpenter, and I found that really interesting, really interesting.
Not paid a lot, $5 a day, $10 a day, that sort of thing, which of course had a lot more purchasing power in 1928 or 1931 than it does now, but still rather surprising because we think of these people as actors. We only know what they did in front of the camera, and
That's right.
At Roach's, everybody did everything. Even with the rise of the unions, it seems to have been pretty much ignored at the Hal Roach studios. Stan Laurel found out differently when he went to Fox that, because of unions and because of the way that a big movie factory was set up, writers write, actors act, directors direct, and editors edit, and nobody crosses over, which was very frustrating for Stan, who did all of those things. But at Roach's, it was like, you're here, you're creative, go create. And there was a story on the bullfighters, which was at Fox. There was a scene with a lot of bales of hay, and evidently, when it was still hay, it was under the purview of the guy who was the greensman, who handled plants that were needed in a scene. Okay, now under the lights, it had dried out and become straw. Now straw is not under the purview of the greensman. Now that's another prop man who handles straw. And so there was this big kerfuffle, this big brouhaha on the set of bullfighters over who would now sweep up the straw so they could get the set ready for the next shot. It's like, well, that's I'm the greensman. I handle it when it's hay. Well, that's the union rules dictated that a different person. And I said, but that would never have happened at the Hal Roach Studios. You probably would have had Charlie Hall and Anita Garvin all wielding brooms and saying, let's clean it up, So, but yes, Charlie was primarily a carpenter, but of course seen to very, very good effect, not only in Laurel and Hardy films, but in films, other shorts at the Roach lot. Later on, he's in a lot of shorts at RKO in the early 40s. And even did some early television work. He's in a couple of the Abbott and Costello television shows. One of which is kind of a remake of Hog Wild, where they're trying to put an antenna on the roof. So Charlie calls in that. And there are 2 episodes of the Groucho Marx show, You Bet Your Life, where Charlie is one of the contestants who comes in. And I remember that I had no idea that these existed. And they used to show, back around 1976, they used to show You Bet Your Life on Los Angeles television every night at 11 o'clock. And so I would come home from working at Knott's Berry Farm, and then I would watch Groucho before going to bed. So there's George Fenneman, the announcer. He says, well, Groucho, we have Charlie Hall here to talk to you on You Bet Your Life. I said, Charlie Hall? And sure enough, he comes in. This is about 1956 or 7, and he looks just like Charlie Hall. And he's sporting this outrageous Cockney accent. And he's going, well, hello, Governor. I'm a taxi driver, and I'd like to be in motion pictures. I've never been in the films before, and I'd like to be in some of the pictures, And hello, Governor. He keeps calling Groucho Governor. And, obviously this is a ploy to try to get casting agents to know that he's out there and try to get some more work as an actor. And so I think there are 2 of them, but they're out there, and they're well worth seeing if you can track them down.
Oh, I must do that.
And like I say, he was working, I believe, in the prop department at Warner Brothers when he died. He was only 60 years old. So so many of the Laurel and Hardy people don't make it past their late 50s, which, me being 62, I just got to go, I'm 4 years older than Edgar Kennedy got to be. Yikes. So
scary, isn't
yes,
it?
It is.
Yeah.
And Beanie Walker also, but of course I was never a chain smoker, so that's probably one reason.
That does help.
Yes. Beanie Walker, you never see a photograph of him without a cigarette unless it's a portrait shot. Otherwise, he's always got a cigarette. Yep.
Oh, brilliant. Well, didn't Stan and Babe advertise cigarettes at one point? I've seen some adverts with.
Yes, for Old Gold cigarettes, right around the time of Babes in Toyland. Because there's a poster, and it says down below, it says, "See Laurel and Hardy in their latest film, Babes in Toyland." So it's what is it? There's throat ease in them thar old golds, which is a play on there's gold in them thar hills, which is obviously the origin of the title of the Laurel and Hardy short. And Lois, Stan's daughter, told me, ironically, Stan hated Old Gold cigarettes. I think he smoked Pall Mall. But anyway, I can tell you that Hal Roach was smoking Winston 100s when he was 88 years old or 89 years old.
Was he?
Yeah. Yes. The 2 times I had sit-down interviews with him were January and February of 1981, and it was just after his 89th birthday. And both times he was smoking Winston 100. He had him in this little shirt pocket. I could see what the brand was, and smoking away as he was talking to us. So, and Richard Currier also was a chain smoker. So I guess that's one reason why he and Beanie Walker got along so well, because they worked in the same office. A friend of mine who lived near Richard Currier, who was about 30 miles south of me in South Orange County. He lived in a city at that point called El Toro. It's now called Lake Forest. But we used to bring him to our Orange County Sons of the Desert meetings. And one of our other members who lived close to him would come and pick him up and bring him to the meetings. And he said, I got to stop doing this because he keeps smoking in my car. And I don't like my car smelling like cigarette smoke after Richard Currier has been in there. So...
Yeah. Oh, and of course, the Stolen Jewels was even that was for was that sponsored by Chesterfield cigarettes or something?
Yes, and oddly enough, it's for a sanitarium, Lake Saranac Sanitarium for actors, but expressly for people with respiratory illnesses.
That's right. Yes.
Now that's ironic that a cigarette company would sponsor a film made for charity. For a hospital for people with respiratory illness. But, in those days, they thought that the only thing it did was irritate your nose or your throat, and that was it. They had no inkling that it would cause lung cancer or emphysema, so... But live and learn, or hopefully live. So
very true. I was just going to say, I was reading about Richard Currier just a couple of days ago, and because at the moment I'm writing a blog on Helpmates, I think I was saying to you.
Yes, I want to see that, since that's my very favorite Laurel and Hardy of all. So,
no pressure then, no pressure. But I was just because I'm sort of into that period, obviously, where Henry Ginsberg is now making his effect, felt across the studio, and of course Richard Currier, fell to Ginsberg's axe a little bit further down the line than Helpmate. I think 12 months later. Yeah. But I was reading in Craig Kalman's book all the correspondence between Roach employees, and there's a bit there. I think he reprints Richard Currier's letter to Ginsberg apologising for his kind of disrespect, and because obviously he sounds like he was a very sort of headstrong guy, Richard Currier, and he would say what he thought about Mr. Ginsberg.
Yes, he could be blunt. Yes, I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. And then I think in your book, I think it mentions, it must have been from when you interviewed him, how he was saying about Ginsberg, are you a movie picture man, or are you a money man, or something like that?
Are you a movie man, or are you a financier? And if you're a financier, I'll forgive you for the suggestion. The suggestion being that Ginsberg said, I think Laurel and Hardy and that gang are wasting a hell of a lot of time.
That's right.
Currier was constitutionally unable to utter a sentence that did not have hell or damn in it. Often both. And he would say, I think Laurel and Hardy and that gang down there, this is Currier rephrasing it, and I'm rephrasing Currier, wasting a hell of a lot of time down there, and I want you to go down there and then report back to me. And the idea that Ginsberg would then get them to speed up and stop wasting time on the set. And the time wasted on the set was probably talking about gags and thinking about what they're going to do. So it was not unproductive time. They may not have been shooting film, but they were preparing for it. But anyway, Currier got indignant about this. Currier had been at the studio since 1920, and Ginsberg had been there for, at this point, maybe less than a year. So here's this new guy telling a veteran of the Roach Studios, what to do. And he said, listen, Laurel and Hardy and all those people down there are friends of mine, and I'm not going to go down there and spy on them. And if you want me to do that, then you can get yourself another boy. Well, he said, the end of that week, I got my walking papers. Well, now, fortunately, Currier, like many other people, wound up almost immediately at Paramount, where they were making lots of comedies. And I have a great still. I'm trying to think. I think the film is Many Happy Returns, but it's Currier is there, and another dear friend of mine named Charles Barton, who was at that point an assistant director at Paramount and later directed Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein and a lot of other good comedy films. He was the assistant director, and they're there with Guy Lombardo's orchestra at the Paramount lot. But but definitely Currier and Barton are there, and some other members of the crew with the Guy Lombardo band at Paramount. So he did not lack for work, and subsequently Currier opened up his own editing, a separate and distinct editing facility, and ran that into the 1960s. So he, even though he was no longer at the Roach lot, he didn't suffer for work.
And also, Elmer, is it Raguse? Raguse? I'm not sure you pronounce it.
Raguse. I'm in touch with his grandson, Craig, who is a very generous guy. He's on Facebook, and he does a lot to help perpetuate his grandfather's work and memory. And he says it's like two first names, Ray and Gus. So
Raguse,
Elmer,
right?
Elmer
Oh, that's
Raguse.
good to know.
In fact, you can hear the Crane twins, Beverly and Betty May, pronounce it on a couple of the introductions for Hal Roach shorts. You know, sound recording by Elmer Raguse, dialogue by H.M. Walker, and directed by James Parrott. We thank you.
We thank you. Yeah, lovely.
13 years old.
But of course, he and Elmer he fell at Ginsberg's axe. But I noticed very interestingly they were trying to get him back.
Yes, which they did.
He went to Fox.
Which they did.
Did they get him back?
He went to Fox, and then he was back at Roach's, and he was still at Roach's. Oh gosh, all through the Streamliner period, and he was there for many years after that. The second time around. I think they realized how valuable he was. He really is responsible for the whole advent of electrical recording, because he had worked for Western Electric and Bell Labs, and they were the ones who developed the transition that instead of recording into a big horn, as they had done in the early days of the phonograph, up until 1924, he is the one who figured out how to use microphones and electrical recording, and thus make a much wider frequency range and much better recording quality. And he's the guy who developed that at Bell Labs, and Bell Labs subsequently licensed that procedure to the Victor Talking Machine Company and to Columbia Records and other record labels. Yeah. And then Raguse became an employee of the Victor Company and went all over the world with portable electrical recording equipment and recorded people all over the place, and then was hired to implement the recording equipment at the Hal Roach Studios. So that's how he came there, because he was paid by Victor for the first several years. Actually, he was not on the Roach payroll; he was on the Victor payroll, and I think that probably changed around 1930. And that's when Ginsberg said, "Well, we've got other guys on the crew who aren't being paid as much. Surely they know what to do as well as Raguse. So we'll let the expensive guy go." It's always the way, get the lesser paid flunky to do the job instead of the higher paid guy who really knows how to do it. So,
yeah, I mean, I can kind of understand that, because you've got the backdrop of the Great Depression and, all the cost cutting measures to try and so I can kind of see why you would do that. But I guess what surprises me is how, when you think about how important Elmer was to the studio, actually transferring them from the silent period into the sound period, and how closely he looks like he worked with Roach, because I mean there's some lovely stills of them together in the and I'm surprised that Roach allowed him to be gotten rid of. I find that really, really surprising, knowing what kind of a guy Roach must have been.
Well, Roach did have kind of a hands-off policy, and his assumption was if you were good enough to be hired for his studio, then you knew what you were doing. And Ginsberg was installed by the Bank of America, who was a primary creditor to Roach. They supplied a lot of the funding, and I don't think he wanted to ruffle feathers with them. They supplied whatever money that MGM did not. So he had basically two sources of funding to make his pictures, and he had to go hand in hand to both of them to try and get money for each year's program of films. Also, not only do you have the Depression, but at the same time you have theaters cutting back on the number of short subjects that they're using in favor of double bills, of double features. And what really happened, it wasn't so much that short subjects disappeared, it's that the major studios began making them all by themselves instead of contracting out to independent producers like Hal Roach or Al Christie or Max Sennett. And Christie and Sennett both went under in 1933. And Roach was the one guy who kept being primarily a short subject studio up until 1935-36. And after that, MGM said, well, the only shorts you're still making are Our Gang. Why don't we buy Our Gang? And they did. In 1938, they bought out the right to the name. They bought the contracts of the kids, and they began making their own Our Gang shorts, which, of course, are markedly inferior to what the Hal Roach Studios had made. But at that point, Roach was out of the short subjects business. It's amazing that he lasted as long as he did, because he was the only independent studio who had films released by MGM. It's not like United Artists, which was sort of a clearinghouse for all sorts of independent producers like Alexander Korda or Disney. MGM made MGM movies, and mainly the reason they wanted the Hal Roach product was Laurel and Hardy. That was the one thing that reliably sold a lot. At one point, Roach made a feature with Charlie Chase, and MGM refused to distribute it. They said, we don't have an agreement for a Charlie Chase feature, and furthermore, we don't want a Charlie Chase feature. We can't sell it. And so, that was, despite all the problems that Roach and Laurel had from 1933, 34, 35, 36, Roach was very much dependent on Stan Laurel for the survival of his studio. And so, you kind of put up with some things from Stan. And Stan put up with things. Yeah. Roach was caught in a bind because MGM with the Laurel and Hardy features kept saying, we want romance, we want music, we want polish, we want these things to look like big budget MGM features. And Stan said, I want comedy. I want Laurel and Hardy to be front and center. And so Roach was always trying to accommodate these two opposing viewpoints, one from his financial source and release his distributor, and one from his creative nucleus of Stan Laurel and the guys who wanted comedy, So, you have to sympathize with Mr. Roach because he had to juggle all these things and satisfy all these people as best he could in order to keep the studio going.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. We're jumping way ahead of the chronology. Yes. I should slap my own wrists actually because I'm promoting that. So I do apologise.
No.
I'd like to be quite strict on the chronology, but no, it's just because I'm researching at the moment. It's a fascinating topic, but Helmets is a few years down the road on terms of the blogcast, I think. So I can have a little.
Well, let me know when you're doing that one because I.
Yes, I will. It's my
favorite.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. No, it's a cracker. So we're just getting back to Battle of the Century, Randy. What are your thoughts, just generally on it as as one of the films in the canon? Where does it sit with you?
Well, I think it's certainly one of the best of the silent shorts. It's very interesting. I think it was William K. Everson had written about it, and he said, "Well, we saw it when Robert Youngson was still putting together." Films for the Golden Age of Comedy, which is a 1957 feature film, which is a compilation of great scenes from Hal Roach and Max Sennett's silent comedies with a very heavy emphasis on Laurel and Hardy. And it has, at the end of the film, 3.5 minutes of the pie fight from Battle of the Century, which for many years was the only footage that we knew to exist on Battle of the Century. So he said, but we saw the whole thing. And he said, I was struck by how dull it was. And he just thought it was not a very good short at all. And he said, Youngson really tightened the editing and rearranged things and made that pie fight into a much better sequence than it was. So, that was, that's interesting because he certainly had the technical ability to do such a thing. So, and then I did get a copy of the cutting continuity, and I saw that, well, he didn't rearrange too much. There's really one little sequence that's in a different position in the Youngson cut from the original, but he really didn't do all that much rearranging. He did cut out the Irish biddy, but then, we finally got to see the complete reel, and it's very similar to the Youngson cut. He really did not do that much. So Mr. Everson's tepid review, his memory was kind of playing tricks on him. So he didn't lead me to expect very much. But now, of course, having seen the complete film many times, it's an excellent film, and it warrants the accolades that were heaped on it all during the 40s and 50s. There's a magazine article for Life magazine that James Agee wrote in 1949 called Comedy's Greatest Era. And he said it was a wonderful film. Evidently, John Ford, the film director, said on one occasion that The Battle of the Century was his all-time favorite movie. That's quite an impressive credit to have. And so, it made it all the more frustrating that we were not able to see the complete film when you had all these people whose memories of it were so, grandiose. What a wonderful film this was. And so it's a very well-constructed film. It's nice how it leads up to the pie fight. And again, as Stan said in some interviews, every one of the pies had sort of a psychological reason for being there. It wasn't just a pie. Because what's funny is not the pie. What's funny is the setup to the pie being thrown. So what's funny about Eleanor Vanderveer is the fact that in one shot you get over the fact that she's a haughty, high society lady, and she's looking at this through her lorgnette with utter horror at these animals who are throwing these pies at each other. And then, of course, her dignity is punctured by a pie landing squarely on her face. And then there's the title saying "Home James."
Yeah.
Mo Howard used to say, what's funny about a pie is the upsetting of dignity. And he would say, you don't throw a pie at an old woman or a child. He said, if you do that, they'll hate you from then on. He said, what you do is you have a guy with a top hat, an ascot tie, a cutaway coat, spats, gloves, and a walking stick, looking very proud and very haughty as he walks down Fifth Avenue. And he says, that is the logical guy to get hit right in the kisser with a pie. Because he says you knock him down off the pedestal and you bring him down to everybody else's level. So just like alcohol, a pie in the face is the great equalizer. Whether you're rich or poor, if you get a pie in the face, you're exactly at the same social and economic status. You're a guy with pie on his face. So
I was quite amazed by the ferocity with that they throw those pies as well. Really smashing them in the faces.
Thomas Benton Roberts, who is the man who gets the tomato in the face from Stan in Two Tars, was like Charlie Hall, primarily a guy on the prop crew. And he told me that they had a guy on the crew named Harry Black. Harry Black subsequently became the overseer of the wardrobe department, and they used to call him Mother Black for some reason. But he evidently was the guy who had absolutely pinpoint accurate aim. And he said, whenever we needed a tomato, he said, when they throw the tomato at Harry Bernard and it hits him right in the face, that's Harry Black behind the camera throwing the tomato. And so I suspect that he was called. I haven't yet seen him on the call sheets, but I suspect, because not everybody who worked on the film is on the call sheets. There were, several people in the camera crew and other folks there. When you see photographs of the crew, you realize how many people are there during the filming. I suspect he was called into action to throw some of the pies because he was renowned at the studio for having accuracy with things like this. And but they did use real pies, and it really was from the Los Angeles Pie Company, because if you go through Culver City directories, there are advertisements for that company. In fact, I think in the book I've got the actual street address, and somewhere on my hard drive, we have 1,000 pictures in the ultimate edition of Laurel and Hardy, The Magic Behind the Movies. But I think for every photo that made the cut, there are another 6 that I sent to Dave Koenig, the editor and layout guy, that didn't get in. So I have many other photos, and I think one of them is a display ad in the Culver City directory for the Los Angeles Pie Company, which is, and of course you'll notice it's one of their trucks with the name of the company easily readable, so they got a little product placement there, as we would call it today.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, no, it's just like when they actually you see somebody really push it into the face, and they're kind of knocking them off their feet. It's really. And I wouldn't have fancied being.
And you have to try to find one that has a lot of white whipped cream on the top of it too, because it reads better in black and white. You want to have that instead of just an apple pie or something where it would be the same tonality, the same grayscale as your face would be. So you want something that contrasts.
Of course. Of course. Talking about colours, were you going to mention something about the tint?
Oh.
We were speaking about the golden tint.
Well, the tinting and toning were things that were often done to silent movies before color photography was really perfected. We all know the story about Mr. Kalmus, who was the head of the Technicolor company, and how he had many different procedures, notably two-color Technicolor, which sort of is biased toward orange and green. There are still several two-color films which exist today. Rogue Song was one of those, and had Babes in Toyland been shot in color, that would have been in two-color, because that was just before the transition to what they call 3-strip, which actually uses 3 different strips of film for different that are sensitive to different parts of the color spectrum, and then they are combined in the printer to make a color print. Anyway, before that came along, they would do tinting and toning, and oftentimes, if it was supposed to be a night sequence, they would tint the film in a dark blue. And of course, a lot of the prints that we have today don't have that. So, they're supposed to be at night and it's in broad daylight. We go, how come it's broad daylight? It's supposed to be 8 o'clock at night. Well, that would have been taken care of in the release prints way back when in the 20s. They would have dyed it blue, you see. So anyway, the boxing sequence, for whatever reason, I suppose maybe to invoke the atmosphere of a smoke-filled arena where it's almost all men there and they're watching this, kind of sweaty sporting event. Maybe the lights in such auditoriums, maybe those were rather amber-colored or dim. I don't know. But in any event, Dick Ban thinks that, and I think Leonard Maltin also, think that the reason that section, and only that section, but not the complete first reel, was there at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in their archives is because it was tinted that way. And it may have been there as an example of, tinting and toning. Anyway, that was discovered hiding in plain sight there at the Museum of Modern Art in 1975. Now, people had been looking for more footage of Battle of the Century probably since the early 60s. Since the initial release of Golden Age of Comedy, people probably thought, well, where's the rest of it? And I don't know if Robert Youngson knew that he had a complete print of the second reel. He'd probably forgotten about it. But he was the one. Robert Youngson had that 16 millimeter print made from the 35 of the complete second reel, and it was in his collection. And then went to William K. Everson, and then Gordon Berkow, and then finally Jon Mirsalis, and then in 2015, Jon Mirsalis finally opened up the film can, the first guy to do that among all those previous owners, and realized that it wasn't just the 3 minutes, that it was the full second reel. And thank goodness he did, and thank goodness he did when he did, because as I say, that reel has now turned vinegar. So it's a good thing it got digitally transferred. And he did make 10 more 16 millimeter prints of it. So there are prints now from that original reel. But anyway, that was missing in action. And then Leonard Maltin was curating a series for the Museum of Modern Art in New York for the upcoming American Bicentennial in 1976. He was doing a comedy festival. And he's going through a file card catalog of what they have in the Museum of Modern Arts film holdings. And he sees Battle of the Century, first reel. And he says, well, that can't be right. That's been missing all these years. And he calls it up, and sure enough, it's a nitrate 35 millimeter print of the boxing sequence, which nobody has seen since probably 1928. And so they did make a protection print of it. Evidently, right after that was made, that protection negative, some thief deciding that he would bootleg it and make a lot of money, stole that original source, and then in trying to make another negative, split that source all the way down the middle into two. So even that is gone now. So I say this film, the fact that we can see it in gorgeous quality on the Blu-ray is a miracle. It's like there's also an Al Jolson short that he made for Vitaphone called A Plantation Act. And the disc for that film, the soundtrack disc, there was only one known to survive, and somebody saw it at a swap meet but didn't buy it. And then many years later, they had to track down the person who had it at the swap meet, and miraculously, they still had it, but it had been broken into 4 pieces and epoxied together with the grooves out of alignment. So that had to be restored and put back together. And the physical print, the silent print, had been misfiled at the Library of Congress as Jazz Singer Trailer. So the fact that is now available on DVD and looks and sounds gorgeous. Again, you would think that these things had been lovingly preserved for 90 odd years, but a lot of these things survive just by the barest, the skin of their teeth, So anyway, Battle of the Century, that was how they found the first reel. And then, of course, Jon Mirsalis found the second reel. And they've now been reunited and in beautiful quality with a new score. I think Donald Sosin is the name of the guy who did the score on the Blu-ray, which I like very much. And, it's now basically, except for that little scene with Eugene Pallett, which maybe runs 2 minutes. I should look at the cutting continuity because on some of the cutting continuities, not all of them, they will give the length of each shot in feet and frames. And they do for Hats Off. So if you wanted to refilm a a remake of Hats Off and be very careful about it, you could do every shot in precisely the number of 35 millimeter feet and frames that the original shot would last. So I have to go back in time. The amount of time that the current version runs. I know that when they went into the sound era, they said 90 feet a minute for 35 millimeter. And so, and there are on the press sheets, they will give the precise amount of footage. And they may actually do that for Battle of the Century because I've got the press sheet for it. So I'll have to go back and see if they do give the precise amount of footage in 35 millimeter. Because from that, we could then determine what the precise length of it was in the original theatrical release.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Answers are always there if you know how to dig them out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, if you've got access to the sources, absolutely.
That's it.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Have you got anything else on Battle of the Century, Randy? Because my notes are out.
No, I think we've pretty well done it, except for the fact that it's a minor miracle that we can now basically just at our leisure plop a little disc into our Blu-ray or DVD players and enjoy this film almost exactly as it was presented theatrically back in 1928, basically. And it proves that with regard to lost film, we should never give up because just in recent years there have been a lot of tremendous things that have come to light. I remember in the mid-'70s, Battle of the Century and Hats Off were thought to be lost to the ages, basically, except for the 3 minutes of Battle of the Century. And we didn't have Duck Soup. We didn't have Why Girls Love Sailors. We didn't have any of the foreign language films. We did not have the soundtrack for Unaccustomed as We Are. Nobody knew about The Stolen Jewels or That's That or Tree in a Test Tube. All of those things have come to light in more recent years. And so along with things like the William Gillette Sherlock Holmes movie or Why Be Good with Colleen Moore, that was thought to be entirely missing. And now there's a gorgeous print with the original synchronized soundtrack. It's fully intact, just, you do a little digging and some of those things show up. So we need to be vigilant about Hats Off on the Rogue Song. And I do have a section in the back of the most recent version of my book called Where Have You Been? Which is Where Have You Been? Which is all about still missing footage because there are other things that are missing. We don't have the German or French versions of Bratz, or we don't have the Spanish or French versions of Hog Wild. We would love to have those. So there are other things yet to be found. And we need to just have archives communicate with each other and private collectors. Australia is turning out to be a very potent source for a missing film because it was the last stop on the film distribution chain. And a lot of times the studios would go, it costs too much to send the print back to us. Just you're the last guy to get this in Australia. Everybody else has gotten it before you. So just dispose of it as you will. Well, theater managers or exhibitors said, well, sometimes the print doesn't arrive here in time of whatever we're supposed to show. So we're going to just stockpile whatever it is that has arrived here. We're not going to destroy it. We want to make sure we have something to show. And that's how a lot of films have been discovered in Australia that were not anywhere else. That's where that's interesting. That's where they found the color Three Stooges short, Hello Pop, which was the only missing Three Stooges short. Well, it was made for MGM in 1933, and it's in 2-color Technicolor. And an Australian guy found it, not realizing that it was the only known source. And within the last 5 years, it has been re-established and been preserved, and now is on DVD. And so the Three Stooges canon is now complete. And we hope that maybe in future years we can say that about Laurel and Hardy.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. And I was saying this to Glenn Mitchell last time. We do have to be thankful that we have as much of Laurel and Hardy's canon as we do. You know, it's a miracle, as you say.
And as I say, thanks to Richard Currier for having the foresight to make 2 fine grain preservation negatives. So
yes, yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. I'm going to start to wrap this up, Randy, because I know you've got to be elsewhere to do your radio shows and so on. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
This episode that's going to go out, the April episode of the Blogcast, is actually our anniversary episode. It's our first birthday. So I'm really glad to have your company today. It's been great to talk to you. And of course, the other anniversary that we are celebrating, and we should say, is the 100th anniversary of Laurel and Hardy's Lucky Dog, the first time they stepped in front of a camera together.
Happy University.
Happy University, absolutely.
I think Lucky Dog is actually, I believe it's February of 21 was when that was shot. But at the intersection of Keith and Barbie Streets in Los Angeles. Barbie spelled Barbee, but Keith and Barbie. And that's still there. I think you can see a house or something that's in the film. So from 100 years ago.
That's amazing. For the benefit of the camera for YouTube, Randy, can you show us your shirt?
Oh, yes, of course. There we go. 100 years.
Look at that.
There we go. And commemorating Lucky Dog, of course, as being the 100th anniversary. So
absolutely right.
We'll probably have a lot of other 100th anniversaries come 2027.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, that's right. Brilliant. Randy, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. And hopefully you've mentioned Helpmates. Hopefully you'll come on again before Helpmates because that's a while yet down the road. So I'll give you a shout and we'll get you back on as soon as possible.
I'll talk about any film you want me to talk about. I have lots of research material on every one of them, so you just give me a call and I'll be there at the ready.
Fabulous. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Randy. Speak to you soon.
Gee, he sure is a swell guy, isn't he?
He certainly is. I knew it the minute I set eyes on him.
You did?
Yeah, that's one thing I pride myself on, is reading character.
Is that so?
Yeah.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Randy as much as I did. Don't forget, if you haven't seen the complete version of The Battle of the Century, it is only available on the Definitive Restorations DVD or Blu-ray set. And you can find affiliate links to purchase a copy in the show notes and also on blogheads.com. And every purchase using those links helps to support this podcast. Now, at the end of last month's episode, I mentioned a video announcement that I was going to be making on the YouTube channel. Now, you may have already seen this by now, but in case you haven't, I was announcing the launch of our brand new series of Laurel and Hardy t-shirts and merchandise. So far, we've released 13 different designs, exclusive designs. The first 2 are celebrating Laurel and Hardy's centenary this year. Now, I know you couldn't see him, obviously, on the blogcast, but Randy was actually wearing the Centenary Pals design, which has a lovely image of the boys sitting on top of a big number 100. And I was wearing the other version, which is in the video, and that's the Centenary Help design. This one's got Ollie stuck under the number 100 and Stan is lifting it off him. These are really cool designs. I'm really, really proud of them, and they are only available through the Laurel and Hardy Blog's Redbubble store, and you can find an easy link to that from the landing page of blogheads.com. That's blog-heads.com, or I'll also put links in the show notes as well. And as well as the anniversary t-shirts, we've also got some other super cool designs, which are using stills from some of your favourite Laurel and Hardy films, such as Sons of the Desert, Tit for Tat, Toad in the Hole, Oliver VIII, Men of War, County Hospital and Busybodies. The images are accompanied by great quotes from the films too, many of which were suggested by members of the Blogheads Facebook group. So if you've ever wanted a t-shirt with Laurel and Hardy, or even Mae Bush, Charlie Hall or Charlie Chase on them, now you can. And so that about wraps up our special bumper birthday episode. If you're still hungry for more, the blog that I mentioned to Randy that I was writing on Helpmates is now live on the Laurel and Hardy blog website. Again, just go to blogheads.com to read that and much more besides. So finally, huge thanks to the brilliant Randy Skretvedt, to the Bohunks Orchestra for the wonderful music, to the Niles Film Museum and to Jon Mirsalis for the use of the audio clip, and especially to Jon, of course, for finding that second reel and giving Battle of the Century back to the world. Special thanks, of course, to everyone who's contributed to today's show. And last but by no means least, thank you to you for sharing this time with me once again. And until next time, it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me. Goodbye.